It's really awesome to be here. I'm so honored and pleased. I'm here to talk about team dynamics. I like to call it co-parenting. And before we get into like the meat of it, I just want to introduce myself, tell you guys a little bit about me. I'm currently the sole test engineer at a company called Fair. We build an online wholesale marketplace for business owners, which is really cool. And I didn't know was a thing before I joined, so that's fun. I am a University of Waterloo graduate. I graduated with a Bachelor of Mathematics, which is, I think, a little bit unique to UW, which is kind of cool. But basically, I spent my entire 45 years talking to computers and trying to get them to solve my math problems for me, which I still kind of do today, just not math related. On a more personal note, I thoroughly enjoy puzzles and reading all types of puzzles, like escape rooms, jigsaw puzzles, puzzle games, all of them. And I'm at Fair now, like I said, but before I have had the privilege, pleasure, whatever you want to call it, of working at other amazing companies such as Mapton, Magnet Forensics, Apple, D2L, and a couple others. Today, like I said, we're going to be talking about team dynamics, but I wanted to set the stage a little bit to kind of give you guys some background for everything else that follows. Hopefully everyone's familiar with this little guy right here. His name's Clippy. He was, and pardon everyone if I get this a little bit wrong, but he was basically a virtual assistant for Microsoft Word a while back. He's no longer, as far as I can tell, in Microsoft Word, which is a shame, but once upon a time he was there. And because he was related to Microsoft Word, he was a product of Microsoft. And I want to kind of set us in this time frame where we're considering Clippy and Microsoft and, you know, these people that work for Microsoft on Clippy. So if I were to ask you guys to describe what you're looking at here, a lot of you would probably say a team, which, good job, you're in the right talk. Some people, especially if you, again, are familiar with the title, might call it a family, which I always do in my head. Anytime I look at a team, I'm always like, okay, you're a family. You're a family, you're a group of individuals centered around making sure that your product, Clippy, and your business, Microsoft, are better and better each time you touch them, and you're there for their development and betterment, basically. I like this metaphor for a lot of reasons, which we're going to talk about throughout this talk, but I kind of wanted to group them into three main reasons for you to kind of give you a rough idea as we go through. So number one main reason why I like this metaphor of this really complicated shared custody situation that we have here is that I think a lot of the methods for handling, tough situations that come up with teams or with co-parenting are very, very similar. As an example, let's say I have the baby and my shift, as I can say, is over, and I'm giving, say, James the baby, and it's James's turn to have the baby. If the baby, craps itself in the middle of the handover, like there's no point in blaming each other for the baby crapping itself. There's no point in me giving the baby to James and be like, your problem now, it's your turn. I'm gonna go, see ya. That's not helpful. That's not productive. The easiest thing to do is like, hey, James, you go get the diaper bag. I'll deal with the laundry. 5 minutes, the two of us, we're done. And then we can carry on with our days. Bit of an odd metaphor, I'll grant you. But if you think it through, it'll sink in, hopefully. Reason number two, I really like this metaphor, is that I think a lot of the things that you can do to help handle your dependence are similar in nature, if not necessarily directly comparable. So, for example, when you're dealing with kids, you want to be able to set ground rules for them so that they accept that there is a consistent level of acceptable behavior that you want them to reach at all times. You can think of that as kind of like your unit tests, your smoke tests that you have before release. You're expecting a certain level of basic acceptable behavior, and you're expecting your product to maintain that through all your releases. And lastly, the reason I like it is I believe the core definition is the same. So if you think about it at its core, a team is a group of people gathered around and working on the betterment of X, the development of X. And so that can apply to a team, but that can also apply to a family because it's a group of people gathered around the development and betterment of a child or two or three. So now that we've kind of set the stage a little bit, I'm going to talk about the structure really quickly. I've broken up this talk into kind of three different sections or themes, if you will. And for each of them, I've got a couple lessons. And for each of the lessons, I'm going to talk about, what it is, why it applies to parenting and to team dynamics, and what are some actions that you can do to kind of emulate that lesson in your day-to-day life. I'm going to talk about an example scenario at the end of each theme to kind of give you a very in-depth example of how you can specifically apply certain actions. And I'm going to follow all of those up with kind of a story time of my own experiences and, what teams I've worked in that worked or didn't work as well. And lastly, because this is, team effort, I wanted to talk about, your experiences and your opinions, and we'll kind of, I forget the word, but it'll be a group chat. We'll get acquainted. It'll be fun. So first theme is about, why your children matter. So lesson number 1 is get on the same page about the big stuff. And with parenting, this is, talking about how it's far more constructive for parents to kind of focus on making sure, you're agreed on the big things. So like whether you're going to immunize your child or not, what religion they're going to have, whether they're going to be vegetarian or things like that. It's far more important to make sure that you're on the same page of those than to concern yourself with the fact that, maybe bedtime at parent A's house is 8, but bedtime at parent B's house is 8:30. Like that's not as important to get on the same page about. But it's also about, kind of accepting and even embracing the fact that, you're different people. You're going to have different opinions and experiences, and that's going to result in, different parenting methods. But that's okay. And that's actually a good thing because you're exposing your child to a wide range of experiences and rules and cultures. Just so long as, you again, get on the same page about the big things that shape your child's development. For teams, like with Clippy and Microsoft, obviously differences in opinions for teams is, widely agreed upon to be important when building anything but software as well, because that's what we're talking about here. You want to hire, group together diverse ranges of people in your teams so that you have full advantage of all their experiences, opinions, their educations, everything. That's how you get a lot of good discussions happening, how you push boundaries, and how ideas are challenged and old status quos get changed. However, there is a fine line between having a great amount of differing opinions and kind of letting those opinions lead you into kind of situations where you have conflicting interests or goals. Having a group of people disagree about how to architect something initially is good, because then you're going to get lots of discussions, lots of good points will get brought up. You'll maybe catch some bugs early that you would have caught further on instead. But you also don't want to have Bob and Alice leave the room and say, oh, I'm going to build it this way and this way. And then you end up wasting a bunch of time and you have a bunch of conflicts down the road because no one's agreed actually on what you're supposed to do. So what can you do about this? First, you want to build an encouraging environment where people feel comfortable speaking up, which is sounds a lot easier than it is, but there's lots of ways that you can do it. And with, COVID and quarantine and Zoom, a lot of the specific things that I can suggest are things like taking the time and putting pauses in your meetings, especially if you are leading the meeting. Whenever a point is made, take a pause and be like, I'm going to give a minute to let people collect their thoughts and to let anyone speak up if they will. Because, people are unmuting mics, they're getting all their equipment situated. It takes time nowadays, which it didn't used to in face-to-face meetings, but that's a really good tip. Another really good one is, if you do happen to talk over someone, which happens a lot, especially in Zoom, I'm very prone to this, unfortunately. Make sure that if someone gets talked over, you call them back afterwards, after that thing is done. Or if you yourself interrupt someone, which again, I do a lot, unfortunately, if your thought is really quick, just finish your thought and they'd be like, I'm so sorry, I interrupted you, Jake. What were you saying? Or like, now back to Jake, apologies for interrupting, that kind of thing. Just bringing it back to them so that they get their own chance to speak. Another thing that you can do is to provide support for gathering other methods, provide support for other methods of feedback. So something that we do at FAIR, which I think is really fantastic, is if we are going to have a meeting about X, let's say a new feature that's coming up, someone will do a really quick write-up about kind of what they're planning on talking about through the meeting, what are the goals of the meeting, and they'll send it out beforehand to everyone, not just the people who are invited to the meeting. And they'll be like, this document's here. If you have any thoughts, comments, throw them in there and we'll discuss them in the meeting. So that people have the time beforehand to kind of mull over their thoughts. And even if they can't attend the meeting, say they're on vacation or something, their thoughts and opinions are at least heard. And if you get to the meeting and you don't really understand what they meant, at least you have it there as a record to be like, let's go ask them about it when they're back, kind of idea. Another method is like typing into the Zoom chat, for example, if someone doesn't really want to talk. It's another good one. Another thing that you really want to do to kind of emulate this lesson is you want to make sure that everyone understands kind of what the goal of the conversation is. Again, if you're having a meeting, I keep going to meetings because this is a really big one for meetings. Make sure that everyone understands up front what the goals are. Again, if you're doing that write-up, then state your goals explicitly and make sure that when you leave the meeting, you have an action item that's tied to every goal that you have. And again, if people start to get off the rails or things like that, just call them back and be like, hey guys, like I noticed we're getting into the weeds a bit. Remember, we're here to talk about this. Let's bring it back to this. Lastly, the thing that you're going to want to do with this is make sure that, however the meeting ends, you end it with a single plan of action going forward for each goal. Even if that action is, let's get together and talk about it tomorrow because we can't seem to come to an agreement today. That's all right. That's fine. It gives people time to, collect their thoughts, mull over people's arguments, and come back to it at a later date. But the important thing is it's a single action that you're all agreeing on, and you're going to stick to it, and you're going to trust everyone to do the same. Lesson number 2 is your children's needs come first. And as parents in a shared custody situation, there's going to be times when you disagree on how to handle challenges or problems that come up. But in these instances, it's important for everyone to kind of keep their focus on what their top priorities are in all their communications, so that you don't, start drifting off and then it turns into a you versus me thing and it's just not productive. And their priorities should be, parents in a shared custody situation is, what's best for your kids? What do your kids want? And as an employee of a company in the case of, Clippy and Microsoft, similar concept applies, right? Your job at this company relies on the business succeeding. If it doesn't, you're kind of all toast. Therefore, the business needs and your product's needs as an extension of that should come first in your interactions with your team members usually. Parenting, whether it's a human child or a piece of code, isn't about winning. It's about doing what's best for that which is dependent on you. But, what does this mean for your daily work? So I know I've already said it, but it's important to remind yourself, as often as you need, whenever you need, that at the end of the day, this isn't a competition. You don't need to win. You definitely do not need to win. Because if you have that mentality of like winning and losing, and you end up losing, let's say the team decided to go with a plan of action against your recommendation, you'll end up feeling frustrated. And, you could end up having a negative outlook on maybe what ends up being a very positive experience for your team. Because, you had a discussion, you came together, you picked one as a team and you went with it. Like that's very positive. But you have this negative outlook on it because you lost. And you also could potentially be missing out on some learning experiences because you're too busy focusing again on the fact that you lost. So just try not to have that mentality because you're going to miss a lot of things. And if you do end up finding yourself in a situation or a discussion that's getting a bit heated up, tensions are rising, people are disagreeing, give yourself permission to take a step back, a pause, a breath, whatever you need, and allow yourself the room to kind of refocus yourself, reflect on what's happening, and center once again on the goal of the discussion, which should be some variation on the betterment of your product or business. This should help you return your side of the conversation to a more factual or impartial platform which will help the interaction as a whole be a lot more productive, because it's very hard to get upset with someone when someone's being very calm, very reasonable, very factual. So by doing that yourself, you're bettering your chances of the entire conversation, just kind of like settling down and everyone being calm. So example situation now. Let's say that you're about to have a discussion about a new feature that your team's building, and you're really excited, but you don't know how to build it because it's very complicated. So step one, I really like the do a write-up thing. So I would say do a write-up really quick, it can take you 5 minutes, of kind of what the feature is, what the reason behind you building the feature is, what are your high-level ideas of what you're going to build, or why you think you should build it that way. Send it out to gather feedback beforehand, and then set up a meeting. And you have this meeting, bring this document, you discuss everybody's ideas. And let's say through the discussion, it's a really good one. You're encouraging lots of people to speak up. You're putting those pauses in to make sure everyone gets their chance. But at the end, no one can agree. Everyone's kind of got these one of two ideas that they're fighting over. So it's just very big two camp. What can you do at that point? So I would say get a method of recording, whether it's Notepad on a share screen, Zoom's whiteboard feature, or Teams whiteboard feature, a physical whiteboard if you're in an actual face-to-face meeting, whatever it is, get something that you can write down on and start listing off the pros and cons, quite literally, of each approach. And again, you want to make it as factual as possible and avoid non-quantifiable statements. So for example, if someone says, I don't like option B, it feels ugly. Okay, ask why. Like, this feels ugly isn't super helpful, but this feels ugly because it's a piece of legacy code that we never touch and no one really knows it, and that presents a lot of unknowns and potential risk. That's a lot better of an answer than this feels ugly. And again, make sure to keep it about the facts as much as you possibly can. The reason that you're doing this is that listing out all of the pros and cons in black and white can help the entire attendance see the big picture and put concerns in perspective. Because yes, touching legacy code that no one understands is very scary. And in normal scheme of things, is probably a very, very, very big con. But if that option, that's the only con, and here's the long list of pros of that option, that suddenly kind of starts to put it in perspective, like maybe we do want to put forth that effort to get all of these benefits. You know what I mean? And if after laying everything out, you're still in an impasse, everyone's still kind of, the vote's still 50-50, you can start assigning point values to it. So like legacy code gets -10 points, but really, really clean code afterwards gets plus 10 points, kind of idea. And then you points. Impartial, like there's not really any emotion that you can assign to that decision at that point. But also because it's, it's mathematical, it works with our brains. And, if at the end of the day, you're still at an even 50-50, like I said, don't be afraid to put a pin in it. Say, hey guys, looks like we can't agree. Let's take the rest of the day. Let's think about it. Let's come back tomorrow morning and we'll make a decision at that point. And give time, especially for those people who like to mull things over and aren't necessarily quick with their responses, gives them time to kind of think about things, respond in that document that you wrote up, and kind of get their argument ready for why they think A or B is better. So next theme is we're going to talk about why your co-parents matter. So lesson number 3 is you're in this together. And, again, as parents, it's important to provide your kids with, a united front, because kids are super sneaky. They like finding those loopholes, those little sneaky things of like, oh, you said I couldn't have candy, but chocolate's not candy, kind of idea, which my niece does do all the time. But it also applies in the team setting, because I don't know about you, but my code bases are so damn tricky and they are constantly finding loopholes. I can't tell you the number of times where I've had a dev, tell me, okay, it should work this way because I've written it this way, and so this shouldn't happen. And I go, okay. And then I go to test it, and it ends up that thing happens because their code was never exercised, because the code just did and ended up in that problem state. And especially the more legacy code and tech debt that you have, the more complicated it can be to keep track of all these things. But, I think one of my favorite things is when I do get a complicated feature to test and I'm feeling a bit worried about it, is when I go to the dev or the dev turns to me and says, you know what, let's sit down. Let's sit down for 10 minutes and just draw this out. Let's figure this out together so that we can be sure that we have the same understanding and that we're thinking of as much as we possibly can. Because, you know, like at that point, we're united against our code base at this point, and it's good. So in order to kind of promote this kind of thing, lots of things that you can do. The things that I would suggest or that I like to do the most often are ask for help, second opinions, as often as you think makes sense. Sometimes people think that asking for help is a sign of weakness. I disagree vehemently. I think it helps build relationships with people, especially when they then ask for help back. And that's great. You want to have that give and take relationship so that you know that you can rely on each other and that you're there to support each other. Especially if your team isn't necessarily prone to asking or giving support or help initially too. Constantly putting forth that, you know, little gentle reminder of like, oh, Jacob says he's struggling a little bit. Like, does anyone know about this code, or has anyone encountered this problem before and could help him out? And again, try to remove any subtext if you can. Sometimes people are like, oh, she thinks I'm doing badly. That's not it at all. Let's just all be adults here. Remove the subtext if you can. And on the phrase of like offering help or support too, is it doesn't have to be the most productive help either. There's many times where I know that a dev is having some issues with some code, or a fellow tester is having some issues with a test plan. And I go, hey, like, do you need a rubber duck? Like, even just chat with me through it. I will make noises. I will provide input if you want, but I'm here if you need me. That kind of thing, so that you're building that sense of rapport, so that you feel comfortable with each other and you know that you can go to each other if, you know, a more in-depth form of help is needed. And lastly, reinforce the idea that you're there to make each other's lives easier. And this is, I think, especially important in scenarios where you have that dev versus test mentality, or dev team versus product mentality kind of thing. The you versus me is a very dangerous thing when dealing with team dynamics. It promotes a lot of tension. And at the end of the day, you're not there to make their life more difficult. You're actually there to make it easier. So just reinforce that a lot. Lesson number, I think we're on 5 now, is empathy first, because after all, your co-parents are human too. And I'm gonna go back to the children thing again. Sorry guys, I'm a big fan of metaphors. Children are very perceptive, and they benefit a lot when their parents work to make their relationship as good as possible, or as smooth as possible. You know, you don't need to be best friends per se, especially in shared custody situations. There's probably some history there. But you need to get along to a certain extent, you know, because otherwise, you know, the terrible twos are going to be awful. The teenage years are going to be awful. God forbid when they start learning how to drive and drink. The same is true for teams though. Team members need to know that they can trust and rely on each other and be willing to work together to overcome whatever challenges they may face. If your team has a good relationship with each other, you'll all be more likely to band together when you have bad releases, or, you know, a feature isn't going as well as you wanted. You'll also be more likely to collaborate with each other, which is good for work. You'll be more willing to help overcome shortcomings, like if a team member gets sick or is struggling. Your working relationships will be smoother, and generally you'll enjoy work more because working with your team will be more fun. So obviously, dream team, how do we get there? First off, you want to show your teammates, you know, that you care more than just a shallow colleague relationship, right? Ask them how their evenings or weekends went. Ask after their families, pets, hobbies, friends. And it may sound like obvious and like, of course, what, like, do you not do that? Are you just someone who likes being alone? And I think it's actually more common than people think to not do this, because, you know, you're so caught up in work, you are focusing on what you're there to do. And it's nice to just take the time and connect with the person behind the colleague rather than just the colleague itself. Another thing that can really help is if you can, joke with each other, you know, find things that you can laugh about, build inside jokes with the team is always really fun. Be really friendly, you know, suggest games, things like that. Come up with team traditions. Some of my teams that I've worked with in the past had traditions like someone would bring cookies every other Friday. We actually had a cookie competition where 4 different people brought in cookies and we all voted. I lost, not fun. Just kidding. Another one that we had is we had a stuffed bus. I crocheted a stuffed bus that we would throw at each other whenever we would bus throw someone, like voluntold someone for something. We would throw the actual bus at them. You want to make your team feel like a family in a way that we keep talking about it being. And another thing is team events are really great ways to do this because sometimes the workplace isn't as conducive to building these types of relationships. So you need to figure out what works best for your team, whether that's let's go for a team lunch. A bit harder right now. Let's hop on a Zoom call where everyone eats their lunch or breakfast and chats. One of my teams right now has set up this thing every Wednesday where we do DJ. And we have the shared Spotify playlist, and everyone puts some of their favorite songs in. And for an hour and a half every Wednesday, we all hop on a Zoom call and listen to each other's music, and we get to share music tastes, which is a lot of fun. Lesson number, I forget. Next lesson, communicate as a team, even in arguments. And of course, communication is a tricky thing to do well, no matter what the circumstances are. But it's an important thing to always work continuously to improve on. And you want to make sure it's always as smooth as you can get it because it's very foundational. If your communication falls apart, the relationship that you've worked so hard to build, all that friendliness and fun is going to very easily suffer, and tension can pop up, and you just kind of ruined a lot of their hard work right there. What other topic of conversation is you want to communicate as a team because it helps set the precedent that you all fail and succeed together, that you're united together. And there's a couple of specific things that you can do to help with this. And number one is be very careful about your language. Language, even as inconsequential as something may seem, is very important. So use words like we, us, and our, and avoid using my, your, and them when dealing with stuff around your team. We think that this is the way to go versus, I think that this is the way to go kind of idea. Another thing to keep in mind is to make an effort to be inclusive. And I think this is also very subtle and a bit harder to keep track of. But it's very easy to accidentally leave somebody out of something. Again, sole test engineer at FAIR, I work across 5 teams currently, and I'm not in their face all the time because of, working from home. I don't sit next to them. So it's very easy for the teams to actually forget about me sometimes. But because I've made relationships with people, whenever they go to a meeting and they see I'm not in there, they're like, hey, is Jade supposed to be in this meeting? Like, should we get her? Which is great because then I'm included. And not only that, I know what the teams are working on, which is important for my job. But on your end, if you're kind of, in the seat of my teammates, is that make sure to be inclusive. If there is a meeting or discussion that's affecting your team and some of your team members, aren't there or aren't aware, include them as much as possible, like bring them up to speed, invite them if you can, just let them know what's going on because it lets them know, A, that you value their opinion, lets everybody else know that you value their opinion, and it reinforces the fact that, you're a team, you rely on each other, and you make decisions more or less as a unit. And lastly, talk a lot, talk about what's working and what isn't. If any of you do retro meetings with your teams, those are a great avenue for, suggesting things that you can improve on or saying, hey, I'm not really a fan of how this format of this conversation that we've had is going. Let's see if we can change it up a bit. Remember the first 2 things though, make sure to talk about them inclusively and make clear that it's as always a group decision. So don't be afraid to try things, but if, the majority of people are vehemently saying no, it's probably a sign that you should try something else. An example time, I've got a couple this time. So I know I've already talked about this, but let's say you've been invited to a meeting about something related to your team or product, and you're the only one on your team who's been invited. So what do you do at that point? I would say step 1 would be bring this up to your team members in a Slack channel or in stand-up, and ask for feedback, opinions, knowledge that anyone wants to share, and then that you'll bring to the meeting on their behalf. If there are specific people who are very interested in the topic, maybe ask the organizer if they can be invited as well. Or if your company is less strict about those things, just invite them yourself. Once in the meeting though, make sure you bring up the points that your team has shared with you. I like to write them down so I don't forget, and make it clear that, if you can, that they came from your team, not just you. And after everything's said and done, the meeting's over, make sure to bring back the results to your team and be as transparent as possible, because at this point, you are a representative of your team. You are not the team, if that makes sense. Scenario number 2. Let's say you found a bug in somebody's code, or someone has found a bug in your code. And I think, again, can't speak about any of you, but I've definitely worked with some testers who are like, hey dev, I found a bug, here's repro steps. Let me know when you fixed it. Which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. It's much better than like, hey dev, your stuff's broken, fix it. Like, it's much better than that. But there's another level that you could go to where you go, oh, hey, I think I found a problem, or I found a problem, depending on how you want to do with your language. Is there anything that I can do to help debug it? Here's the repro steps, but can I get you logs? Do you want me to reproduce it on your machine? Do you want to take a look at my machine? Because maybe there's something special about my setup. And if they're like, no, I'm good for now, that's totally fine. But maybe check in with them later, see if they're struggling with it, and offer the same support again. Or even better, if it's something where it's more of a design thing where you're not entirely sure that we want to fix it for this release or whatnot, doesn't hurt, even if you're 100% certain of the outcome, to be like, hey dev, I found this thing. I think we're probably good for now, but I just wanted to get your opinion on it. Just wanted to see what your thoughts were. Because again, it's uniting the two of you against the feature instead of just kind of leaving them on their own side of the fence and you staying on yours. And another thing that you can do is, if you can, again, workplaces are not always conducive to this, but if you can, make the bug itself a joke, even if it's just being like a little silly with your language or with your test data, or in the reproduction steps. At a company that I worked at that was more lax, the way that I would do it was I'd write out all the reproduction steps in a very factual manner. And then the last one where it's like, hey, look at the result of the broken thing. I'd be like, boom, or stare at your computer screen in awe because the world has changed, or something like that. Just something silly so that the dev who's reading it or the tester who's reading it gets a little chuckle at the end of it, and it makes the bug a fun thing instead of a very negative thing. And last theme, you matter, of course. Because it's hard to parent, full stop. Parenting, though, when you yourself are not in your healthiest state, just makes the job, really extra hard. How can you be the best you that you can be for your kids, for your team, for your co-parents, if being your best self is hard? So, slightly trying to provoke change, from within, or just working well with your team in general, can be a very difficult challenge sometimes. And doing it under stress, is only going to compound that stress until getting out of bed is hard, or you don't want to go to work anymore and you're starting to look for another job, even if your job might actually be fine. In order to be a good contributor and a good teammate, you kind of first need to ensure that you are in your healthiest possible state going forward. So what can you do? And I think it's very hard sometimes to be healthy, especially in quarantine times. But the things that help me are, finding the joy in whatever I can. Maybe you got a new type of coffee bean and, you haven't tried it before and it actually turned out pretty good and you're a little excited about that. That's a good one. If you have pets and they're being a little extra cute today, or your cat is chasing a squirrel through a window, that's kind of fun. Maybe you can laugh and smile about that. Or, going on Reddit and you saw this funny thread about an ostrich sticking its head in the sand. I don't know. Just little things. Try to find the little things, the little silver linings. Because yes, the world is not the best right now, but there are a bunch of little things, little happy things that are just there waiting for you to notice. Number 2 is make sure that you feel safe. Obviously, everyone deserves to work in a safe and healthy work environment. So if for whatever reason that isn't the case, work with your manager or HR or other similar people in your workplace to ensure that you do. Maybe, a team shift is in order. Maybe someone needs to be reprimanded or told that their behavior is unacceptable. Whatever it may be, work to make sure that you feel safe at work, because you deserve that. No one deserves to feel uncomfortable at work. And lastly, don't be afraid to seek help, professional or otherwise. Sometimes that outside perspective is very useful for seeing things in a different light. I know whenever I'm getting down in the dumps, one of the things that helps me most is to talk to my friends about, what they're doing today. Like, how's your day? Tell me about your day, because my day sucks. And they have like a little happy, funny story about, what their dog did or something. And I get to focus on that instead of how my day's going. Scenario. Let's say you have one team member who is struggling. And so as a good teammate, you're covering for them, but you're beginning to feel a bit overwhelmed with all the work that's on your plate because you've got your work and their work. What do you do in that situation? So first off, reach out to your manager to let them know that you're beginning to struggle with your workload, because there's nothing wrong with that. Talk to your other team members too and see if you can share the load of that teammate across several of you instead of just taking on the entire load yourself, because it won't do you or your team any good if you start struggling too as a result of this, because now you're down 2 people instead of 1. So make sure you're your healthiest self. And also, once you're feeling a bit more stable, maybe reach back out to that teammate and see if you can support them in getting, help from others, not just workload wise, but have that empathy for them as a human. See if you can, provide support or advice for them in that regard. Again, if you're comfortable. So, bit of story time. I'm going to do a quick time check for a minute. Okay, bit over. Sorry, folks. Team A. I'm just going to tell you about 3 teams that I've worked on in the past. So, Team A, that cartoon face is very descriptive of how I felt with that team when I first started. There was a large responsibility. We had 3 or 4 different products across this team, but a very low number of resources. And instead of everyone kind of working on everything all together, they'd actually organized it so that it was a team of specialists. So each dev had their own product. And so these 2 devs worked on product A, these 2 devs worked on product B, and these 2 worked on product C. And that was the way it went. If there were bugs in any one area or tickets in any one area, they stayed with those developers, which meant that any bugs that popped up in that area, all the other devs would get frustrated because it made the entire team look bad, but no one else would fix it, which is a problem. They also didn't like the testers very much. It was me and one other tester. We had a bunch of flaky automation, and unfortunately, none of them really understood what we did. It was very much a throw over the fence kind of company when I got there. We also really didn't meet our commitments a lot, because if someone was sick or struggling and tickets weren't getting done, no one else would be able to pick them up because no one really understood what to do, which caused a lot of resentment. And as a result, no one really liked working with each other, and the atmosphere was very draining. I think I had a screenshot of a Slack message I sent to one of my friends, which said, what time is it? It's 9:37 a.m. How am I already this furious? Just to give you an idea of that team culture and dynamic. And if I were to go back to the family metaphor for a second to describe this team, it would be, that family where the parents are just constantly fighting and trying to undermine each other and hates all of their extended family. So, Team B. Team B actually worked pretty well together. Respect between individuals was pretty high, and everyone was generally trusted to be able to get their work done. If help was asked for, generally an offer or 2 would be made, not always accepted, but there would be the thought, the effort. And they had funny inside jokes for overtime sessions, which there were a lot of. Unfortunately, though, collaborating outside the team was really tough, and the dev organization was actually was a bit of a 90s high school full situation. It was full of cliques, and upper management was the teacher who played favorites. And unfortunately, that team was a favorite, which resulted in a lot of elitism and snobbiness, because we were good at meeting our own commitments, but no one else was in their headspace. And even though, the opinion was mostly propagated by 1 or 2 individuals, I think it was a failing on everybody's part, because the rest of us did nothing to really actively discourage this opinion. We had disagreed, but we didn't really say anything. And so as a result, we did okay in our own objectives, but cross team was every single time. And so to go back to the metaphor again, Team B would be the one where the parents get along pretty well, but they're very snobby. Their kid's clearly the favorite. They don't treat their nieces and nephews as well, and extended family doesn't really like them. So Team C, dream team, I like to call it. It was basically Team B, but very elevated. Respect and trust were really high. Everyone worked really well together and worked hard to make sure our commitments were met. But we were also able to have a lot of fun together. We spent a lot of time building those relationships. We spent a lot of time offering and asking for help and support. And so even bad releases had a really hard time bringing our team morale down. by a decent amount, because, we'd just be like, oh, well, this one was a bit rough, but the next one will knock it out of the park kind of idea. I think the big difference with this team was that the friendliness and sense of family and unity that we built on that team, we actually extended to the entire dev organization. So as a result, not only were we successful in our own right, but we were also successful when working with others. And so again, to go back to the metaphor, Team C was a set of parents who got along very well with each other, and everyone in the extended family, and everyone likes them and has them over all the time. So the really quick thought is kind of, which family would you rather be in? Which team would you rather have? And which child or product do you think would do the best, the easiest? And for anyone thinking, maybe just got lucky, because I did. I got very lucky with Team C. I want to go back to Team A for a minute and share the kind of happy ending to that story a little bit. Because when I first joined the team, every day was a struggle, like I mentioned, furious at 9:37 a.m. I kid you not. But, I knew teams weren't supposed to be this way. I'd been on good ones in the past. And so, sick and tired of the situation, I decided to sit down and reflect on what would I do in those previous teams, and how was it different from what I was doing currently? And what about my team members? What was the difference in behavior there? And I realized a lot of the things that, I've talked about with you today. So I decided, enough is enough. I'm going to see if I can fix this. We're going to try and make this better. So first off, I started trying to form positive relationships with everyone, because I figured if everyone likes you, if everyone's getting along, it's going to be that much easier to push some of the other things. I followed all the advice I had given you and tried to make sure that they knew I was on their side. So instead of enforcing that you versus me mentality, I did my best to let them know, I'm not here to make your life harder. I'm here to work with you. I'm here to make your life easier. And in fact, I'm going to do everything in my power to help you push tickets along, because that's what will help us. So, I offered to help debug. I would help outline test scenarios for them so that they could check it before it got to me if I was feeling a bit swamped. I offered to help push code reviews along and talk to other code reviewers and see, that PR, can we have a chance to get to it kind of idea. Along with being friendly with them, obviously, this went a long way towards dispelling the negative attitude they had towards me, which I then shared with the other tester as well, and was like, here are all the things I'm doing, here's why I'm doing them, and here's kind of the benefit of what's going to come out of it. And so they started doing it too. And after a while, that entire negative attitude towards testers and testing on the team was basically gone, which is good. Step one done. Next, I talked with my manager and pointed out, the current organization of the team with the specialties and feature owning wasn't really working, because it was negatively affecting our output in two big ways. The issue with the rifts and the tension, and also our bus quota was extremely low. And for people unfamiliar with the term bus quota, it's basically how many people can step in front of a bus before you lose all knowledge of a feature, a product, a piece of code. And it was like 1 for us, 1 or 2. But the important thing, I think, was after I outlined those 2 steps, I followed it up with lots of examples of all those commitments we'd missed recently due to illnesses, vacations, and all the conversations that had gone poorly in meetings and whatnot, due to bad attitudes. And I kept it as factual as possible. It wasn't I said, they said. It was, here's the problem, and here's a bunch of examples for you. Once I got them on board, I also started pushing for and planning meetings, sharing tickets between the devs regardless of specialty area. So again, making sure everyone was like, we're all one team. We don't have specialties. If that ticket comes in and this dev's busy, why doesn't this other dev pick it up? Or, why don't I pick it up? You said it's easy. Spend 5 minutes, teach me how to do it, and I'll help you out. That kind of idea. Making sure everyone knew that, we're all working together. It's all one team, all one big happy family. This actually worked really, really well. Everyone started shifting away from their tensions of like, oh, this product's bad, it's X's product, to be like, it's our product. How do we make it better? They got to share more ideas, commiserate more. It was all great. And the team as a whole became a lot happier and more collaborative. It was a much better time. Obviously, I can't take credit for all of those changes because it was a team effort, subconscious or otherwise. But I would go out on a limb and say that I'm really happy I took the steps that I did, because I think they had a very meaningful impact, even if it was just serving as an example to others. And by the end of the process, I had a team that I was happy and very proud to work with. So enough about me. I'm going to speed through the last little bit really quickly. Let's start talking about you guys and your teams. When you go back to work, either later today, tomorrow, whatever the day may be, I want you guys to remember that, you're all working towards a collective goal. In sickness and in health, for better or worse, you are a team. And you yourself are a very important member of that team, as is everyone else. And as a member of that team, you should feel empowered to speak up about improvements, adjustments, or even entirely new processes that your team can adapt to make your team dynamic better. And you should also do your best to empower others to do the same thing. And remember, at the end of the day, you got to make it work for you, because everyone's unique, every team's unique, but you'll be much happier and more productive contributor to your company if you have a good team dynamic to work with. So to summarize, get on the same page about the big stuff. So promote diversity of opinions, but remember to collectively make a plan and stick to it. Your children's needs come first. Remember, it's not about winning. And the best thing to do sometimes is take a step back and take a moment to remind yourself of that. You're in this together, so ask for and offer help and support in equal measure and build a supportive space. Empathy first. Your co-parents are human too, so form positive relationships with your team members and make your team a happy place to be. Communicate as a team, even in arguments, so be inclusive with both your actions and your language. First, heal yourself. Above all else, make sure you are healthy and able to handle the challenges that come with working closely with others. And lastly, change starts with you. So set an example and do your best to affect positive changes from within. I want to leave you with this quote because I think it really applies. The definition of as in co-parenting, is together, mutually in common, cooperation, compromise, I say it weird, apologies, coexist, and communication all start with co, and each lend itself to a successful co-parenting or team relationship. So that's my talk. A big thank you to Malang, Google Images, for all the adorable cartoons today. Thank you to James for inviting me here. Does anyone have any questions?
There was a question that was entered in the chat for you.
Oh, pardon me. I need to go find the chat. Zoom hid it entirely for me. I apologize. Scenario, senior, junior QA team member conflict. Senior QA working on product for the last 15 years. Junior QA complaining senior not transferring knowledge. Senior saying juniors asking repetitive questions. Now situation becoming known. Oof. That's fair. So honestly, that's a really tough situation. So I sympathize. Similar things that I've done in those scenarios is kind of, emphasize they're here to learn. The junior member is here to learn. Not everyone learns at the same speed. Not everyone learns the same way. If they're asking repetitive questions, maybe there's a different way that you can phrase it and kind of work with the senior, emphasizing the fact that, they're coming to you so that they can learn from you, which is a really big honor. Someone wanting to learn from you is fantastic. It means that they respect you, respect your knowledge. And unfortunately, sometimes when dealing with senior folks, I'm going to say something that's going to sound negative, and I promise you it's not, but it's a little bit of an ego stroking. You want to make sure that they feel important and valued while taking away the negativity that comes with having people rely on you all the time. And so as a QA lead, you're kind of mentoring them on how to mentor people in a way. I've worked with a lot of senior folks who are very bad at mentoring folks, and it takes a lot of effort on the lead's part to, again, work with them, be like, let's just take a moment. I know they're annoying you. It's fine. They'll get it eventually. Let's figure out how we can teach them in a different way that makes that so that they can understand. And, if that still doesn't work, maybe try getting the senior to transfer their knowledge to other seniors. And so that way you have the knowledge transfer, you have more people who understand, and there's more people to learn from. Does that kind of help? Does anyone have any team experiences that they want to talk about that, went really well for them? Because obviously this is all coming from my experiences, and everyone else has their own experiences.
This is Teresa Potts, by the way. I have had some good experiences in the past. one of the things I noticed that was a big component too of the team doing well that I was on at the time was that they didn't change the teams as much as they did before. So like we used to change teams like every 3 months or something, and mix a whole new set of people all the time. Um, and the team that I was on that did really well, we had been together like over 2 years. We had gotten to know each other, pretty well at work and outside of work. And so I think that played a big part. Um, I don't, hopefully teams aren't getting mixed up all the time, but every organization is a little bit different. But I know that definitely played a key role um, in our success.
Yeah, it's always really good to work with people you're super familiar with for sure.
Hmm.
Cool. Well, if no one has any questions, I guess we're done. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your Thursday.